Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. In the past 2 weeks, relations between Russia and the United States have dramatically deteriorated. First, the U.S. broke off talks with Russia over cessation of hostilities in the bombing campaign in Aleppo in Syria. Russia then disengaged from a critical nuclear disarmament negotiations related to a treaty that had been in place since 2000 as a part of a post-Cold War disarmament framework. Now, more recently, White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest said that U.S. is considering a response to alleged Russian hacking of U.S. political groups such as the DNC. Here's a clip of John Kerry, Secretary of State, alleging that Russia has been engaged in war crimes in Syria, truly escalating things.
Russia and the regime owe the world more than an explanation about why they keep hitting hospitals and medical facilities and children and women. These are acts that beg for an appropriate investigation of war crimes.
And then here's what the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson had to say about Russia-U.S. relations and alleged cyber hacks.
I would also like to comment on what is now happening with Russia-U.S. relations. I do this with great regret because there is no good news here. We regret we observe how Washington continues to destroy mutual relations. What we hear on a daily basis about Russian hackers is simply a lie. Nobody has seen them, but everyone already knows of them.
Joining us to discuss how serious the deteriorating circumstances between Russia and U.S. are is Richard Sakwa. He is professor of Russian and European politics at the University of Kent and an associate fellow of the Russian and Eurasian program at Chatham House. He has published widely on Soviet Russian and post-communist affairs. His upcoming book is titled Russia Against the Rest: Pluralism and the Post-Cold War Crisis of World Order. Thanks so much for joining us, Richard.
My pleasure.
So, Richard, at the surface, it looks like relations between Russia and the United States are heavily deteriorating, and we can add the additional component of UK now, who's been authorized to engage the military exercises that's going on over Syria if they are feeling threatened by it. These are the airstrikes that are going on in Syria. Is the situation as bad as it sounds?
It's probably worse. I think that in fact, the world as a whole is dancing on the edge of a volcano. You may know that the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists argue that we are now, their doomsday clock is 3 minutes to midnight. And that's about as bad as it's ever been, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Berlin Wall going up in 1961. So it's extremely bad. And the worst thing is, there's actually no particular sign, no sign of it possibly getting better in the near or even the medium future. One of the things which makes it particularly dangerous now is that the old Cold War systems that had been put in place after the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 have largely been dismantled. So you could argue, and I would certainly argue, it's not a new Cold War, it's far worse.
Richard, let's take one of these at a time. First, let's take the situation where the United States is accusing Russia of being involved in the email hacks that are going on in order to influence the U.S. elections. Is there any legitimacy to these allegations, and what is the response of Russia here?
Well, the response is clearly negative, to say they've got nothing to do with it. One has to say that the case is not proven. It doesn't mean to say that Russia isn't involved, but so far there's been no evidence. It's so hard to prove these things. In this case, we know, for example, the hack of the Democratic National Committee. That there's a fellow called Guccifer 2.0 was involved from Romania. You may say that's got nothing to do with Russia, but he's got a Russian site and so on, and Russian language skills. So, it's completely, so far the evidence suggests is circumstantial. Those specialist agencies who claim Russia is responsible argue that Russia's got the technical capacity and the motivation to do it. Certainly that's the case, but it's unproven. And whether it actually will shape the American election, I'm not sure. For example, what was revealed, the huge amount that was revealed that the DNC was covertly supporting Hillary Clinton against Bernie Sanders, is damaging. And so I think that we should be careful not to shoot the messenger here, but look at the message. It's quite damaging, I think, if that was the case. In fact, it was the case that what was meant to be an impartial body was demonstrably not impartial. I think that's the scandal to be investigated.
Richard, whenever there is a U.S. election underway, they would like to have the threat of war hovering over them. And Russia and China, as enemies of the state, is conveniently evoked. How much of these tensions are just posturing in light of the election coming up? Or is there real evidence of these hacks?
It's certainly a lot of posturing. I think that in this case, it's not a sort of crisis that immediately threatens the United States in the sense of the United States specifically coming under attack. So I don't think that the benefits of incumbency will be derived from attacking Russia, China, or anybody else. However, the level of rhetoric, informational warfare, and mutual condemnation has reached unprecedented levels. And I don't think it's just connected with the presidential election. It's been gathering pace for at least 2 or 3 years. And the dangerous and the worst thing is that this is taking place under the watch of President Obama. And he's a man who's clearly very rational, very calm, very collected. And yet, if this is how bad it can get under an intelligent, calm individual like Obama, imagine what it could be under any possible alternative successor.
Richard, there's been much ado about how the president of Russia, Putin, prefers to have a Trump presidency over a Hillary Clinton presidency. What do you make of that?
I think Russia faces the choice that we all face, or certainly US citizens face, and that is a choice between two candidates who both have huge negatives. From the Russian perspective, of course, Hillary Clinton has long been very antagonistic to Putin himself. They get on very badly. I think they've got mutual contempt for each other. Plus, her political baggage goes back quite a long way. Yes, she was involved in Obama's reset early on in 2009, 2010. But soon after that, their attitudes, relations deteriorated quite badly. And even in the second presidential debate on Sunday, she once again talked about Russian aggression, which is very strange, since in Syria and elsewhere, it's the inability to come to terms has led into a situation which it's not a question of aggression, it's a question of just trying to find a way out. On the other side, of course, Trump is no gift, I think, to anybody, and I think Russian analysts, as much as anybody else, understand that his positions are unstable, even though he occasionally has said things which will please Moscow, for example, that NATO is obsolete, but very soon after that, he backtracked and actually said NATO is absolutely essential. So therefore, everybody knows it's very hard to deal with Donald Trump.
Richard, let's turn to Syria. The situation in Syria is intensifying since the talks between the U.S. and Russia have broken off for the time being. And the situation in terms of engaging Russian air strikes in Syria by the UK military, RAF. What do you make of all of this, and is there any end in sight to this intensification?
Well, on the one side, the British debate just recently, and Boris Johnson, our foreign minister's comments, I think just typical bombast and bluster. I think the most, talks, fortunately, I think are restarting, and clearly all credit to him. There is going to be a meeting in Switzerland, I think, this coming weekend. So hopefully they'll start a diplomatic process again. The thing is that there's so many things going on that, as you say, it's difficult to get a handle on it. One of the things which we should really, obviously the situation in Aleppo is absolutely awful. But then if you track back a little bit, when we had the ceasefire, what happens? The United States attacked the forces at Deir ez-Zor, which was a stationary position. There's been a stalemate there for over 2 years. The United States perfectly well knew where the Syrian forces were. So the fact to say that it was an accident that they attacked is far-fetched. I mean, it may be the case, which case it gross incompetence. What it meant was, when nearly 100 Syrian soldiers died, it meant that Islamic State took over a position which they've been trying to get for a long time, including the airfield at Deir ez-Zor. So basically, Russia believes that the United States is trying to push all Syrian forces out from east of Palmyra. That's one thing, that's a background thing. As for that convoy which was attacked, again, we don't know. It may have been a Russian force, may have been a Syrian force, but there's no signature. If it had come from above, you'd actually have shell holes below. But it was probably attacked from the side. In other words, it was probably some sort of Islamic State or militant attack. So again, that's not proven. So time after time after time, we have these accusations. Of course, it's awful in Aleppo. But you go back last year, when Russia started the air bombing campaign on the 30th of September last year, what did the United States do? It immediately transferred over 1,000 TOW anti-tank weapons to the militants in Syria to attack and defeat the sovereign Syrian army. It was quite extraordinary. In other words, what could have been, as it were, let the state, however unpleasant the Assad regime may have been, it could have put an end to the misery of the Syrian people. Instead of which, the United States rushes in arms to intensify the conflict and conflagration. And as I said, we can track back over and over again, all the way to Hillary Clinton's call for the overthrow of the Assad regime soon after the first demonstrations back in 2011. That's unbelievable. Have they learned nothing after Libya, after Syria, after Iraq, after Afghanistan even? So it's a complete breakdown of the situation. And I think even though the situation is dreadful, I think that this rhetorical bluster at the moment is utterly hypocritical, because at the same time, the West is imposing sanctions on Syria, which across the country, hospitals and schools and all other facilities have no genuine access to medicines. Tens of thousands of people are dying and suffering because of Western sanctions on Syria today.
All right, Richard, we're going to wrap up this segment for now, but we'll have you back to continue this discussion. Thanks for joining us.